The fire crackled low in the grate at Baker Street, its flames casting restless shadows along the walls, while a bitter London wind rattled the panes. I had been content to let the night pass quietly with a book in hand, but Holmes was seated in his habitual chair, his long, angular frame bent forward in a posture of thought so intense that even the smallest sound seemed an intrusion. It was the kind of silence I had come to recognize, not idle but charged like the hush before a storm. At last he stirred. "Watson," said he, without lifting his gaze from the missive upon his knee. "Observe the curious nature of this hand." He extended the letter toward me with a languid gesture. Though his eyes glittered with the sharp light of interest, I unfolded the thick cream-colored sheet. The writing was elegant but hurried, a tremor of urgency in every stroke. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I implore your immediate attention. Strange and terrifying occurrences have unsettled the peace of my family's estate in Wexford. The matter concerns a building of ancient design upon our grounds, known locally as the House with No Doors. I beg you to come at once, for I fear that unless you do, I may soon share the fate that has already claimed the courage of my servants and the health of my household. I place my trust wholly in your abilities, for I know of no other recourse." With deepest urgency, Lady Cassandra Wexford, I lowered the sheet slowly, feeling the weight of its words. "A house with no doors? Surely some fanciful tale intended to pique your curiosity, Holmes." "On the contrary," he replied, springing to his feet with sudden animation. "It is precisely the kind of impossibility that demands explanation. Doors are the essence of ingress and egress. To deny their presence in a house is to deny the very notion of habitation, yet we are told it is seen with lights within and whispers about it. Superstition, Watson, is but the veil beneath which the most practical deceptions are practiced." He paced before the hearth, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Note, too, the phrasing. I may soon share the fate that has already claimed the courage of my servants and the health of my household. These are not the words of a woman indulging in whimsy. There is fear here, genuine and pressing. And where there is fear, Watson, there is opportunity for some villain to profit." It was clear that his mind was already racing ahead, threading possibilities together. My own curiosity had taken hold as well. A house with no doors, an impossibility indeed, and yet the image clung to me like a phantom. "When do we depart?" I asked. Holmes's thin lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "First light tomorrow. I have already telegraphed Lady Cassandra to expect us by the evening train." And so it was that we left Baker Street with dawn still breaking over a gray horizon, the rattle of the carriage wheels carrying us swiftly to the station. Holmes traveled in silence for the most part, his eyes closed as though in sleep, yet I knew his mind to be turning ceaselessly upon the problem at hand. Once or twice he muttered to himself about architecture, contraband, and the peculiarities of old English estates, scribbling a note or sketch in his pocketbook before sinking back into reverie. The journey into the countryside was long, the urban sprawl of London yielding slowly to fields bare in winter's grasp, and then to lonely stretches of moorland. A mist clung to the low ground, coiling like smoke around leafless trees, until even I began to sense the melancholy of the place. By late afternoon we had reached the station nearest to Wexford Hall, where a carriage awaited us. Lady Cassandra herself was there to receive us, a tall woman with auburn hair and eyes clouded by fatigue. She clutched her cloak tightly against the chill, and her voice trembled slightly as she greeted Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot thank you enough for coming. I feared you might dismiss my plea as mere fancy." "On the contrary, Lady Cassandra," Holmes replied with grave courtesy. "You have presented a puzzle most compelling. You speak of a house upon your grounds. I should like to hear everything you can tell us of it before we see it for ourselves." She nodded, and as the carriage carried us away from the station, she spoke in low, deliberate tones. "The house stands upon the farthest edge of our estate. It is ancient, older than the hall itself. Records say it was built by my great-great-grandfather, though for what purpose none can say. It has never been inhabited, not in living memory. The windows are sealed, the walls unbroken. There is no door, no entrance at all. Yet in recent months strange occurrences have plagued us. Lights are seen within, faint but undeniable. At night, cries have been heard upon the wind, and more than one servant swears to have glimpsed a face staring out from behind the glass. They refuse to go near it now. 2 have left our service altogether." Holmes listened intently, his long fingers drumming lightly against his knee. "And you yourself, Lady Cassandra? What have you observed?" She hesitated. "I have heard the cries. Once in the dead of night, I myself saw a flicker of lantern light behind one of the upper windows. And," she faltered, lowering her eyes, "I have felt watched, even here in my own chamber, as though eyes followed me from that dreadful house across the grounds." Her words hung heavy in the carriage. I saw the faintest tightening of Holmes's jaw, though his voice remained calm. "Fear has a way of magnifying shadows. But shadows, Lady Cassandra, are cast only where something stands to block the light. We shall see soon enough what substance lies behind them." We reached Wexford Hall as the evening sun bled into the horizon, setting the sky aflame with streaks of crimson and gold. The hall itself was a fine old manor, though its stone walls bore the wear of centuries. Beyond its sweeping lawns, the land stretched toward the moor, and there, faint against the darkening sky, I glimpsed it for the first time. A squat, window-lined structure standing alone, grim and lifeless, yet somehow watchful. Even at that distance, it chilled me. Dinner was served, though Lady Cassandra barely touched her plate. Holmes ate sparingly as always, his mind elsewhere. When at last the servants withdrew and the hall grew quiet, he rose abruptly. "Watson, fetch your coat. We go now." Lady Cassandra's eyes widened. "You mean to visit the house at night? Is there a better time?" Holmes returned evenly. "Darkness is the ally of those who skulk in secrecy. If there is activity within, we shall not find a better chance to witness it." A lantern was procured, and soon we were striding across the cold, dew-soaked grass, our breath rising in pale clouds. The air grew colder still as we neared the house. Its walls loomed taller than they had from a distance, the stone dark and pitted, the windows sealed tight with heavy boards that bore no sign of recent tampering. Yet as Holmes moved the lantern's glow across the surface, I fancied I saw a shimmer, as though the glass concealed something more than darkness within. Holmes circled the structure slowly, every step deliberate. His gaze lingered on irregularities in the masonry, subtle shifts in the mortar, the faint lines where stone met stone. He pressed his hand here, tapped there, and once crouched so low I feared he might vanish into the shadows. "Remarkable," he murmured at length. "A facade of solidity, yet it tells a tale if one listens. Look here, Watson, the irregular settling of these lower stones, and here the faintest mark upon the soil as though something heavy has been dragged." I bent close, straining to see. In truth, I saw little, but I had long since learned to trust the vision of his keen eyes. Suddenly a sound pierced the silence. A faint, plaintive cry, distant yet distinct, drifting across the moor. My blood chilled at once. It came unmistakably from within the house. Holmes straightened at once, his face a mask of intent. "There, Watson. Do you hear it?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Then the game is afoot indeed," said he. "We are no longer chasing shadows, but substance. Someone or something is within that house. And by heaven we shall uncover how they come and go." At that, he extinguished the lantern, plunging us into the cloak of night, and together we stood in silence before the house with no doors, listening as the whisper of cries faded into the wind. The night air pressed heavily around us as we stood in the shadow of that strange doorless structure, the cries we had heard still echoing faintly in my mind. The wind hissed across the moor, tugging at our coats, carrying with it the faint tang of damp earth and age-old stone. I could scarcely imagine any living soul confined within those walls. Yet Holmes, his keen features sharp in the dim light, betrayed not the slightest doubt that what we had heard was no trick of imagination. He crouched low against the foundation, running his thin fingers across the uneven mortar. The silence between us was broken only by the whisper of grass in the wind and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, without a word, Holmes produced his magnifying glass and examined the faint marks upon the soil that he had earlier indicated. "Observe, Watson," he murmured at last. "These depressions, too angular for the random scattering of stones, too regular for mere erosion. Something has been moved across this ground repeatedly, something weighty and deliberate." I peered down, straining in the dim glow of his lantern, and at last discerned the faint grooves he traced. A chest, perhaps, or a crate? Precisely, but more curious is the direction. These marks do not lead away from the house, they lead toward it. Yet where is the means of entry? There are no doors, no unsealed windows. Either the laws of matter have been suspended upon this moor, or we are in the presence of some contrivance most cunningly concealed. I could not help but cast a glance toward the dark windows above us, half expecting some pale face to peer down at our intrusion. The silence seemed to thicken around us until Holmes rose abruptly, dusting his hands. We shall gain nothing more tonight. To linger here is to invite discovery, and I prefer to observe before being observed. Come, Watson. Tomorrow, in the clear light of day, we shall see what secrets these walls are willing to yield. We returned to the hall with that eerie cry still whispering in our ears. Lady Cassandra awaited us in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly before her, eyes wide with unspoken questions. "Well?" she asked, her voice taut. Holmes gave her a bow that was both courteous and enigmatic. "We have confirmed there is activity within the structure. Rest assured, Lady Cassandra, we shall uncover the means by which it is achieved. But tonight I advise you to lock your doors and let no one persuade you otherwise." Her face paled, but she nodded gravely and withdrew. Holmes said little more that evening, instead sitting by the fire with his long legs stretched before him, his gaze fixed upon the flames as though they concealed some cipher awaiting his solution. I had learned long ago not to disturb him in such moments, and so we passed the hours in companionable silence until sleep claimed us both. The next morning dawned bleak and mist-heavy, the moor draped in veils of gray. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his eyes alight with that peculiar energy that seized him when a case had gripped his faculties. "Watson," said he briskly as we broke our fast, "today we study the house in earnest. I require cord, chalk, and a stout spade. And you, my good fellow, must steel yourself for a thorough exploration of damp earth and concealed mechanisms." By mid-morning we had set out across the moor once more, laden with the implements Holmes had demanded. The house stood in its lonely vigil, its windows dark and unyielding, its stone walls beaded with moisture. Yet in daylight it seemed less spectral, though no less forbidding. Holmes wasted no time in circling the structure, pausing often to kneel and mark the ground with chalk or test the firmness of the soil with his spade. His movements were swift and precise, his eyes darting to every crack and irregularity. At length he halted near the north wall, where a tangle of roots coiled out from the base of an ancient oak. "Here, Watson, do you perceive how the ground sinks unnaturally in this spot? The roots are disturbed, the soil less compact than the rest. Nature has been interfered with." I knelt beside him, and indeed the ground seemed softer beneath the spade when Holmes pressed it in. Together we cleared away the roots and soil until at last the dull clink of metal met our ears. A square of iron revealed itself, set flush with the earth. "A hatch," I exclaimed. "Just so." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And not of recent manufacture either. Observe the corrosion about its hinges. It has endured many years, though not without use." With considerable effort, we pried it open. A musty draught of air rose up from the darkness below, and the faint outline of stone steps descended into the earth. Holmes held the lantern aloft, its glow spilling into the passage. "Well, Watson," said he with a wry smile, "shall we see where this rabbit hole leads?" We descended cautiously, the stone steps slick with damp, the air close and heavy. The passage wound downward, its walls rough-hewn, until at last it leveled into a narrow corridor. Our lantern cast eerie shadows along the walls, which bore strange markings, scratches, stains, and here and there the remnants of cobwebs torn by recent passage. Holmes examined them keenly. "Not the work of animals. These are human marks, Watson. We are on the trail indeed." The passage ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door, its iron bands eaten with rust. Yet when Holmes pressed it, it yielded with surprising ease, creaking inward to reveal a small chamber. Dust lay thick upon the stone floor, but there were footprints, fresh, undeniable, leading deeper into the gloom. We followed them into what must have been the heart of the house. The walls here were solid stone, the air stifling, yet before us loomed an inner chamber, lit faintly by the filtered glow of daylight through a high, narrow crack in the stone. And within that chamber stood a table, upon which were scattered objects most curious, ledgers, scraps of paper, a lantern still warm to the touch. Holmes bent over the ledgers at once, his eyes darting across the neat columns of figures. "Contraband," he muttered. "Smuggling records, no doubt of it. Tobacco, spirits, perhaps worse. This house was never meant as a dwelling. It was built as a vault, a place to conceal and to trade under the cloak of fear." As he spoke, a sudden sound pierced the silence, the scrape of stone, the faint echo of footsteps. Holmes extinguished the lantern at once, plunging us into shadow. We held our breath, straining to listen. The footsteps drew nearer, slow and cautious, as though the intruder suspected company. Holmes's hand closed around my arm. His voice was a mere whisper. "Steady, Watson. Whoever comes, they will lead us closer to the heart of the matter. Not a sound, not a movement." We crouched in the darkness, the chamber heavy with suspense as the steps approached. A figure appeared in the faint shaft of daylight. Tall, cloaked, the hood drawn low over his face. He moved to the table, rifling through the papers, muttering under his breath. Holmes's grip tightened. "Do you see, Watson? The hand that moves the ghostly lights, the phantom of the doorless house." At that moment a faint cry rang out again, unmistakable and near, as though from within the very walls around us. The figure stiffened, then hurried toward a hidden panel at the far end of the chamber. With a deft movement he pressed against the stone, and a section of wall swung inward, revealing yet another passage. Without hesitation he slipped within, and the panel closed behind him. Holmes exhaled softly, his eyes alight with triumph. "There, Watson." The secret of ingress and egress. A concealed mechanism, as I suspected. We are upon the brink of revelation. Tomorrow we shall return with tools, and perhaps with Lestrade. But for now we know this much. The house with no doors is no haunted relic. It is a fortress, and within it, our quarry hides. We retraced our steps in silence, the cries and the shadow of that cloaked figure lingering in our thoughts. When at last we emerged once more into the cold daylight of the moor, I breathed deeply of the fresh air, grateful to be free of the suffocating dark. Holmes, however, stood gazing back at the house, his eyes narrow, his lips pressed tight. "Mark my words, Watson. The true danger of this house lies not in its walls, but in the secrets it was built to protect, and we have only begun to uncover them." The moor stretched before us in long, rolling swathes of gray and brown, as Holmes and I made our way back toward the hall, the chill air cutting at our cheeks. I glanced once over my shoulder at the looming bulk of the doorless house, its stark silhouette rising out of the mist like some abandoned fortress. The memory of the cloaked figure rifling through those ledgers gnawed at me, as did that strange, plaintive cry we had heard within the walls. Holmes, though outwardly calm, walked with a peculiar sharpness in his stride, the sort of restless energy that told me his mind was occupied with connections invisible to the lay observer. His gaze was fixed ahead, but I could see in the twitch of his fingers and the faint narrowing of his eyes that he was already reconstructing every detail of what we had witnessed. Once inside the hall, Lady Cassandra met us in the entryway, her face pale with apprehension. "You have learned something?" she asked, her voice hushed as though afraid the walls might overhear. Holmes regarded her steadily. "Enough to be certain, my lady, that the mystery surrounding the house is no ghostly tale. There is a method behind these happenings, a deliberate contrivance. But before I speak further, I must ask, has anyone else within these walls reported disturbances? Strange sounds, missing items, unexplained visitors?" She hesitated, her hands tightening upon the folds of her gown. "There have been," whispers among the servants. "Some swear they have seen a light upon the moor at ungodly hours, drifting as though carried by no human hand. Others claim to have heard a woman's voice weeping from the house itself. But I myself, I have seen nothing, only the unease of those around me." Holmes inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "It is often in the whispers of those dismissed as fanciful that truth hides. Tell your people they are not to leave the hall after nightfall. Whoever moves within that house counts on fear to shield his work, and fear is often the most loyal of accomplices." Her lips parted as if to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. She withdrew, leaving Holmes and me alone in the study. He dropped into a chair, steepling his long fingers before him. "Watson," he said, "we stand upon the edge of a very peculiar case. The smuggling records we discovered, if genuine, speak of an enterprise both bold and long-standing. But contraband alone does not explain the cries we heard, nor the cloaked figure's haste to conceal himself. There is more at play here, and it is to that hidden element we must now turn our attention." I could not help but ask, "Do you believe someone is imprisoned within that house?" The cry seemed too real, too desperate to be some trick. His eyes gleamed in the firelight. "That, my dear fellow, is the question that demands an answer. It may be that a prisoner is held within those walls, Or it may be that the cry is an artifice designed to reinforce the legend of a haunting, and so deter inquiry. Whichever it proves to be, it is a mask for something of greater consequence. That night, Holmes refused sleep. He sat upright in the chair, pipe in hand, his eyes never straying from the fire save to consult his notebook, where he scrawled observations in his precise hand. I dozed uneasily upon the couch, roused now and then by the crackle of embers or the sudden scratch of his pen. It was not until the clock told 3 that he rose abruptly, his face sharp with decision. "Watson, wake yourself. There is movement abroad." I stumbled to my feet, and at once I heard it too, the distant echo of hoofbeats across the moor, muffled by the fog but distinct nonetheless. Holmes snatched his cloak and motioned for me to follow. Together we crept through the hall and out into the night, the mist damp against our cheeks, the lantern dimmed so as not to betray our presence. We crouched at the edge of the grounds, peering into the shifting veil of fog. At length a rider emerged, cloaked and hunched, guiding a weary horse along the narrow track that led toward the doorless house. Holmes's hand pressed firmly on my arm, cautioning silence. We watched as the rider dismounted and vanished into the mists near the northern wall, precisely where the hidden hatch lay buried. Holmes's eyes glinted. "Our friend of yesterday returns. Let us see whether he brings company." We waited in silence, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Then faint but clear came that cry once more, a woman's voice, plaintive, mournful, issuing from within the house itself. The sound chilled me to the bone. The rider reappeared soon after, burdened now with a heavy sack slung over his shoulder. He secured it across the horse's back and mounted swiftly, disappearing into the fog as quickly as he had come. Holmes exhaled softly, his gaze still fixed on the vanishing shape. "Contraband indeed, Watson. But the cry is no mere embellishment. It comes too timely, too pointed. There is a living soul behind it, I would wager my reputation. We must act, and swiftly." The following day dawned clear, though the moor seemed no less desolate under the weak sun. Holmes wasted no time. By noon we were once more at the hidden hatch, this time armed with sturdier tools and ropes. "Today, Watson," he said, lowering himself into the darkness, "we test the extent of this warren. Our quarry grows bolder, and boldness is the herald of carelessness." We retraced our path into the underground chamber, the ledgers still upon the table where we had left them. Holmes examined the mechanism of the secret panel with quick, practiced hands, murmuring softly to himself as he noted the worn edges of the stone and the hidden catch. With a deft push, the wall yielded once more, revealing the passage through which the cloaked figure had fled. The air within was colder, carrying the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. We followed the passage as it twisted and turned, our lantern casting wavering light upon damp stone. At last we emerged into a chamber larger than any we had yet seen. Here the walls were lined with crates and barrels stacked high, their lids marked with symbols I did not recognize. Holmes pried one open with his knife. Within lay bottles, their labels foreign, their contents unmistakable. "Spirits," he said, his voice tight. "French brandy by the look of it. Smuggled here in vast quantities, no doubt to evade duty. But such a scale of operation implies an organization of considerable reach." I was about to reply when a sound froze us both, a low moan, soft and despairing, issuing from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. We turned sharply, the lantern beam sweeping across the darkness until it fell upon a figure. A woman sat huddled against the wall, her wrists bound, her gown torn, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. Her eyes widened in fear as the light touched her, and she shrank back with a cry. "Madam, you are safe," Holmes said swiftly, his tone gentle but firm. He hurried forward, cutting her bonds with his knife. She clutched at his sleeve, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "They will come back," she whispered. "You must leave. You do not know the danger." "On the contrary," Holmes murmured, "I know precisely the danger. And now that you are free, the advantage is ours." We helped her to her feet, though she could scarcely stand for weakness. Holmes supported her with surprising gentleness, his keen eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of pursuit. "Watson, we must get her out at once. The longer we remain, the greater the risk." As we turned toward the passage, a sudden noise thundered behind us, the heavy crash of the panel door slamming shut. From the shadows emerged figures, cloaked and hooded, their faces obscured, their movements swift and purposeful. Holmes's eyes flashed. "So the hornet's nest stirs. Watson, stay close. This game grows dangerous, but it is far from lost. The chamber echoed with the sound of approaching footsteps, the air thick with menace, and in that instant I understood fully. The house with no doors was no mere relic of stone and legend, but a fortress of flesh and steel. Its walls concealing not only contraband but the cruel machinery of men who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And we, caught within, stood now at the very heart of its peril. The panel had shut with a resonance that seemed to reverberate through the very marrow of my bones. The sound of stone striking stone final in its terrible weight. In the sudden silence that followed, the captive woman clutched my arm so tightly that I felt the pain of her nails pressing through the fabric of my coat. The flickering lantern light danced across the walls of that underground chamber, elongating the shadows of the cloaked men who had stepped forth from the gloom. Holmes, standing but a pace ahead, did not so much as flinch. His eyes, cold and calculating, moved swiftly from one figure to the next, measuring their stance, their numbers, the way they spread themselves to cut off our escape. His hand rested lightly upon the hilt of his knife, though I could see in the set of his jaw that he would not draw it unless forced. "There is no need for violence," he said, his tone sharp and commanding, the kind of voice that could slice through the din of battle. "You have been unmasked. The only question that remains is whether you will submit quietly or compound your crimes with bloodshed." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then one of the cloaked men laughed, a short, mirthless sound that echoed harshly against the stone. His voice, though muffled, carried an accent, foreign, though I could not place it. "You think, monsieur, that discovery is the end. But discovery means nothing if you do not leave this place alive." The woman whimpered, burying her face against my arm. I tightened my grip on her shoulders, steadying her trembling form. Holmes, however, only tilted his head as though he had expected no other reply. "Watson," he murmured without turning, "observe their formation. 2 guarding the passage behind, 3 before us. They mean to hurt us rather than strike outright, a curious choice for men who claim the advantage." The leader barked a command in that same foreign tongue, and the 3 men before us began to advance, their steps deliberate, their movements perfectly in time with one another. Holmes acted at once. With a sudden motion, he seized the lantern from my hand and hurled it to the floor. It shattered with a violent crash, the oil spilling across the stone and igniting in a wash of flame. The chamber filled with smoke and light, the shadows writhing wildly. "Now, Watson," Holmes cried. I did not pause to question him. Supporting the woman with one arm, I followed as Holmes darted toward the nearest stack of crates. He shoved one aside with surprising strength, revealing a narrow crevice in the stone wall behind. Without hesitation, he pressed us through, his long frame slipping into the gap as though he had known of its existence all along. The cries of our pursuers rang out behind us, their voices rising in anger and alarm. A hand grasped at my sleeve, fingers clawing, but I wrenched free and stumbled into the darkness beyond. The woman stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught her and forced her forward. Behind us, Holmes dragged the crate back into place, plunging us into blackness. We pressed on through the narrow passage, the air foul and stifling, the sound of pursuit echoing faintly through the stone. Holmes moved swiftly ahead, his hands brushing the walls as he sought our path. I dared not ask how he knew where he led us, for breath came hard in the oppressive air, and the woman's faltering steps required all my strength to support. At last the passage widened, and the faintest glimmer of light appeared ahead. Holmes quickened his pace, and we emerged into a small chamber, this one not filled with contraband but with rough-hewn stone and a trickle of water that glistened as it fell from the ceiling. "An escape tunnel," Holmes said, his voice low but urgent. "Abandoned perhaps, but it will serve. Watson, help her along. We must be swift." We followed the stream of water, crawling at times where the tunnel narrowed, stumbling when loose stones shifted beneath our feet. The woman's sobs echoed faintly, muffled by her effort to keep pace. More than once I feared she would collapse entirely, but Holmes would not allow it, urging her forward with a sternness that brooked no refusal. At length, we emerged into the open air. The night had deepened and the mist hung heavy across the moor, but never had I felt such relief as in that moment, drawing in the cool, damp air after the stifling confines of the earth. Holmes did not pause. He guided us along the slope, keeping low, his eyes ever upon the shifting fog behind. We made our way back toward the hall, the lights of its windows shining dimly through the mist. Only when its gates loomed before us did Holmes finally allow the woman to sink upon a bench, her face pale and drawn, "Who are you?" he asked at once, crouching before her. "And why have these men kept you hidden in that accursed place?" She lifted her eyes to him, her lips trembling. For a moment she seemed unable to speak, but then the words came in a rush, broken by sobs. "My name is Isabelle Fournier. I came to England from France to serve as companion to Lady Cassandra's cousin. But I was taken on the road. They told me I must remain silent, that if I spoke they would kill me. I do not know why I was chosen, only that they brought me to that dreadful house and kept me there as though I were a prisoner of war." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And did you ever hear their names or their purpose?" She shook her head. "They spoke rarely and always in whispers. But once I heard them speak of a shipment, a great cargo that must not be discovered. They said the house was perfect, that no one would ever dare to search it." Holmes straightened slowly, his face grave. "It is as I suspected, Watson. These men used the legend of the house to cloak their operations, but their daring has grown too great. They now risk exposure by holding prisoners, perhaps to prevent discovery of their trade." "And what of the men themselves?" I asked. "They will not rest while she is free." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "Which is why we must strike before they regroup. Their strength lies in secrecy. Their weakness lies in the overconfidence that secrecy breeds. By dawn, Watson, we shall know more. For tonight, let the lady rest. Tomorrow, we set the snare." He rose, his tall figure casting a long shadow upon the ground, and I saw in the hard glint of his eyes that he had already conceived the next step of his plan. The game was no longer one of shadows and whispers. It was a battle now, waged in the dark halls of that ancient house. And though I could not yet see the full shape of the enemy, I knew that Holmes did, and that he would not rest until every secret was laid bare. Yet even as we returned within the safety of the hall, I could not shake the memory of those cloaked figures, their silent advance and the certainty in their leader's voice. Discovery meant nothing, he had said, if we did not leave alive. And though we had escaped, I could not help but wonder how long that narrow margin of fortune would hold. For the moor was vast, and the house with no doors still stood, its secrets buried deep within stone, waiting to ensnare us once more. Sleep was little more than a shallow veil that night, a restless drifting upon uneasy waters, for every creak of the house and sigh of the moor seemed heavy with unseen menace. I woke more than once to find Holmes seated at the window of our chamber, his thin frame bent in contemplation, his eyes fixed upon the fog-shrouded outline of that dreadful structure, the house with no doors. He smoked incessantly, the blue haze of his pipe mingling with the pallid light of dawn as it crept slowly across the sky. At length, when the servants stirred and the first notes of birdsong pierced the silence, he rose with an air of finality. "Watson," he said, his voice low but resolute, "the enemy will not wait. If we linger, they will vanish into the fog with their contraband, their identities still cloaked. We must seize the advantage now." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "You mean to confront them directly?" "Not directly," he corrected, fastening his coat with deliberate care. "That would be folly. But their movements are predictable, their arrogance their undoing. Last night's pursuit convinced me of one fact beyond dispute. They consider themselves unassailable within that house. The tunnels, the false walls, these are their stronghold. To defeat them, we must not storm the fortress, but compel them to abandon it." "And how do you propose we accomplish such a thing?" I asked. He paused, turning to me with the faintest flicker of a smile. "By setting a fire, my dear Watson. Not of flame, but of fear. We shall give their legend back to them magnified, until they are driven from the shadows they so covet." Before I could press him further, Lady Cassandra entered the room, her countenance pale but her posture steadied by an effort of will. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "you brought Mademoiselle Fournier to safety, for which I owe you more than words can repay. But the terror is not ended. The villagers whisper that the house burns with lights each night, that spirits walk the grounds. I fear panic will spread and with it ruin to our family's name." Holmes bowed slightly. "Lady Cassandra, the house has no spirits, only men. It is their lights you see, their movements that spawn whispers. But you may serve us yet if you have courage." Her eyes widened. "You would have me return there?" "Not within," Holmes replied, "but without. I need only that you speak with your tenants. Spread the word that you have summoned aid from London, that the legend of the house will be broken before another night has passed. Let them gather at a distance when the hour comes, and let them bear witness to its fall. She hesitated, but then nodded, her chin lifted in defiance of her own fear. If it will end this curse, I shall do it. With her departure, Holmes turned once more to me. Watson, we must reconnoiter the grounds by daylight. Come, there is much to prepare. We crossed the moor in silence, the grass still wet with dew, the mist clinging low to the earth as though reluctant to yield to the sun. The house rose before us, stark and forbidding, its blank windows staring sightlessly upon the land. By day it appeared less spectral, yet no less sinister, the weight of its secrecy pressing upon the air. Holmes crouched by the eastern wall, his long fingers tracing the mortar between the stones. See here, he murmured. The passage we discovered is but one of several. These irregularities in the foundation, these faint depressions in the earth, they speak of multiple outlets concealed with care but imperfectly so. The house is honeycombed beneath. Smugglers could come and go unseen, provided they knew the keys to each hidden door. And you mean to use this knowledge to entrap them? Precisely. Tonight they expect to move their cargo under cover of darkness. We shall force their hand earlier. With the villagers as unwitting witnesses, their own concealment becomes their greatest peril. Fear of exposure will scatter them more effectively than any armed raid. Throughout the day, Holmes busied himself with quiet preparations. He examined the hall's stores, selecting lanterns, ropes, and a few modest tools. He dispatched a messenger to the nearest town with a sealed letter, the contents of which he did not reveal even to me. Isabelle Fournier, though still pale, insisted upon assisting Lady Cassandra in her errands among the villagers, lending credence to the tale that deliverance was at hand. As the sun sank and the mists thickened once more, Holmes gathered me at the edge of the moor. His face was drawn but alight with purpose, his keen eyes glittering. This is the hour, Watson. Remain close and trust that what may seem madness has reason at its heart. We advanced through the fog, the lanterns casting long, wavering beams across the grass. Holmes halted at the dried well where first we had glimpsed the hidden stair, and with deft movements he set about securing a rope across its mouth. If fortune favors us, he said, our quarry will attempt retreat through here, and if not, then we shall pursue them in earnest. The first stage of his plan revealed itself in sudden brilliance. Holmes had arranged the lanterns in such a way that their glow reflected upon the fog, casting distorted shapes against the walls of the house, shapes that writhed and shifted like specters. He produced from his pocket a small device no larger than a watch, which emitted a low, mournful wail when wound. The sound drifted across the moor like the cry of some unearthly being. I confess even I felt the prickling of my skin at that uncanny noise, though I knew its origin. From the distance came murmurs. The villagers, gathered as Holmes had bade, stirred in fearful awe. Within the house, lights flared suddenly, moving in agitation. Shadows crossed the blank windows, swift and uncertain. Then from some hidden aperture, figures emerged, cloaked and hurrying, their heads bent as they carried heavy crates toward the passage at the well. Holmes's eyes gleamed. They flee, Watson. They think the spirits themselves rise against them. Let us see where panic drives them. We concealed ourselves among the rocks, watching as the men lowered their contraband toward the passage. But Holmes had chosen his trap well. The rope he had secured was taut, and as the first crate descended, the earth shifted beneath their feet. One of the smugglers cried out as he slipped, the crate tumbling and smashing open upon the stones, spilling its contents, bars of silver, glistening in the lantern light. A gasp rose from the villagers who had drawn closer, and the cloaked men froze as the weight of discovery descended upon them. Now, Watson, Holmes cried, leaping from our concealment. We rushed forward, seizing one of the startled men before he could draw a weapon. Another bolted into the mist, pursued by villagers emboldened by the revelation of common thieves where once they feared phantoms. Holmes grappled with the leader, the two struggling fiercely at the edge of the well, until with a sudden twist Holmes wrenched the man's arm behind his back and forced him to the ground. Enough, Holmes barked. Your game is ended. The legend of the house no longer shields you. The leader spat upon the earth, his accent thick. You think you have won, monsieur. But this is only one cargo, one house. The network is greater than you dream. Holmes's gaze hardened. Perhaps. But one link in the chain has been broken, and from this link I shall trace the rest. The villagers gathering around murmured in astonishment and anger, some raising fists at the captured men. Holmes raised a hand for silence. Let justice take its course. These men are smugglers, nothing more. The curse of the house was but their veil. See now with your own eyes. The house with no doors hides no spirits, only thieves. A murmur of relief spread through the crowd. Lady Cassandra, pale yet resolute, stepped forward. Then the curse is broken. The house shall no longer stand as a terror to this land. Holmes inclined his head. Not yet, my lady. Its stones still conceal passages we have not explored. Until all is laid bare, the shadow lingers. Tomorrow we shall enter fully, and then the house with no doors shall fall silent forever. As we escorted the prisoners back to the hall, the silver locked safely under guard, I could not shake the memory of the leader's words. One house, one cargo, his tone had been almost mocking. Holmes, too, walked in silence, his brows drawn in thought. I knew that for him the night's triumph was but the beginning of a far larger pursuit, the threads of which already wound through his mind, and as I cast one last glance toward the looming silhouette in the mist, I felt the certainty that within those blank walls greater secrets yet waited, secrets that might demand more of us than mere courage to uncover. The morning that followed our capture of the smugglers dawned with a clarity that seemed almost at odds with the night's grim revelations. The fog that had shrouded the moor dissipated as though reluctant to cloak the house further, and the air was sharp, carrying the scent of heather and damp earth. Yet within that brightness there lingered unease, for the prisoners, though subdued, had spoken little, their silence bearing a weight of menace more profound than open defiance. Holmes had slept but little, if at all. I found him in the great hall at first light, seated before the confiscated crates of silver, his long fingers tracing absent patterns upon the lid of one, as though reading a code invisible to all but himself. Lady Cassandra entered moments later, her composure steadier now that the veil of superstition had been torn from her estate, though shadows of fatigue lined her face. The villagers slept at last, she said quietly. Their fear is lessened, but I hear whispers of other houses, other curses. These men you seized, are they the root of it, Mr. Holmes, or merely branches of a darker tree? Holmes looked up, his eyes sharp. They are not the root, my lady. They are but agents, expendable cogs in a greater design. Their silence tells me more than words could. They are trained, disciplined. Men who expect replacement should they fail. Such organization does not spring from rustic brigands. I ventured a question. Then you believe their network extends beyond these walls? Undoubtedly, Holmes replied. The silver itself is clue enough, refined, marked, yet lacking record in any legitimate channel. It suggests theft on a continental scale, perhaps even a syndicate of international reach. But before we pursue shadows abroad, we must pierce the heart of the one before us. The house with no doors yet conceals its final secret. Until we strip it bare, all else remains conjecture. Lady Cassandra shivered, though whether from chill or foreboding I could not say. You mean to enter it today? Holmes rose, his lean figure taut with determination. Yes, by daylight, when phantoms lose their sting. Watson and I shall chart every passage, every false wall. Only when the house yields its full measure shall we know how deep the rot runs. It was near noon when we set forth, accompanied by two of the estate's stoutest men to aid us with lanterns and tools. The house loomed stark and silent against the sky, its windows blank, its walls implacable. Holmes paused at the threshold, his gaze traveling over its facade as though committing every stone to memory. Observe, Watson, he murmured, indicating the absence of any true entrance. No door, yet within lies a labyrinth. Such design speaks not merely of secrecy, but of arrogance. The builder believed his creation impervious to discovery. It is our task to prove him wrong. We entered by the same aperture through which the smugglers had fled, descending the hidden stair into the chill belly of the house. The air was heavy, close, bearing the scent of damp stone and long neglect. Our lanterns cast uncertain circles upon the walls, revealing narrow passages branching in unnatural angles. Holmes moved with unerring purpose, pausing now and then to mark the walls with chalk from his pocket. So that we do not lose ourselves, he explained. The architects of this warren relied upon confusion as their strongest defense. We shall deprive them of it. At first, the chambers we uncovered were empty, bare stone rooms, their only features the cunning seams of sliding panels or the iron hinges of concealed doors. Yet soon we found evidence of recent occupation. A table scarred with use, fragments of cloth, a bottle of foreign make. In another chamber, crates half filled with straw as though awaiting contraband. Holmes knelt to examine the straw, lifting a piece to his nose. Imported, he muttered, from Portugal, judging by its texture and scent. Smugglers do not waste cargo space on such filler, unless it has traveled with the goods. This suggests their operations span the breadth of Europe. We pressed on, the passages twisting and descending deeper. At length we came upon a door of iron cunningly concealed behind a false wall. Holmes's eyes lit with satisfaction. The heart of the maze, Watson. Help me. With effort we forced the door ajar, its hinges groaning in protest, and entered a chamber unlike the rest. Here the walls were lined with shelves bearing ledgers, maps, and sealed packets. A single lantern left by its last occupant stood upon a desk, illuminating the room with a ghostly glow. Holmes seized the nearest ledger, his fingers turning the pages with fevered haste. His gaze darted over the columns of figures, names, and symbols. As I suspected, he breathed. Here lies the record of their network, ports, shipments, routes disguised as legitimate trade. My God, Watson, this is no mere gang of smugglers. This is an empire in shadow. I examined one of the maps, its surface pricked with pins and strings tracing lines across Europe and beyond. And this house was but one node. Precisely, Holmes said grimly. A fortress of storage and concealment. The absence of doors was their boast, that no lawman could penetrate what had no entrance. Yet arrogance is ever the seed of downfall. As he spoke, a sound broke the silence, the faint scrape of stone upon stone. Holmes froze, raising a hand. We listened, breath held as the noise grew nearer. Then, from a narrow slit in the wall, a figure emerged, cloaked and masked, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. He carried a pistol, which he leveled at us with steady hand. You should not be here, he said, his accent thick and unfamiliar. Our attendants faltered, one dropping his lantern with a crash. Shadows leapt madly across the chamber. Holmes, however, stood unmoved, his gaze fixed upon the intruder. On the contrary, he replied, we are precisely where we must be, and you, sir, are precisely too late. Your comrades are in custody, your ledgers in my possession. The house with no doors has yielded its secrets. The man's eyes narrowed. You know nothing. Destroy these papers, kill you both, nothing changes. But in that instant Holmes moved with a swiftness that startled even me. He seized the fallen lantern and hurled it against the wall, the glass shattering, the flame flaring wildly. The sudden burst of light blinded the intruder, and Holmes sprang, grappling him with wiry strength. The pistol discharged, the shot ricocheting off stone, but Holmes had already forced the man's arm aside. We rushed to his aid, overpowering the masked figure and binding him with rope. Holmes, breathing hard, regarded him with cold triumph. One more link in the chain, he said. Each captured man brings us closer to the hand that wields them all. We searched the intruder, finding upon his person a letter, cryptic yet suggestive of orders from abroad. Holmes pocketed it without comment, his mind already leaping ahead. The remainder of the exploration yielded further chambers, though none so revealing as the ledger room. At last, weary and covered in the dust of ages, we emerged into the pallid light of afternoon. The villagers watched from afar, murmuring as they saw us reappear, our prisoner in tow. Lady Cassandra met us at the hall, her eyes alight with mingled fear and relief. You have uncovered the truth? She asked. In part, Holmes replied. The house is no longer a den of phantoms but of men, and men may be fought. Yet the struggle does not end here. This estate was but one mask worn by a vast conspiracy. I must carry the trail to London, and from there, perhaps across the seas. She clasped her hands tightly. Then the house is free at last? Holmes regarded her with rare gentleness. The house is but stone, my lady. It is your courage and that of your people that is freed. As for me, my work only deepens. That night, as we sat once more before the fire, Holmes pored over the ledgers, his face illuminated by flickering light. His eyes burned with the fever of pursuit, his mind already threading the web of names and numbers. I knew, as I watched him, that though the house with no doors had been conquered, it was but the opening move in a greater contest, one that would test us to the utmost, and perhaps lead us far from the quiet moors of Devonshire. For Holmes had seen the shape of the shadow, and once he glimpsed his quarry, he would never cease the hunt. The morning following our perilous descent into the house with no doors was marked by an atmosphere of restless unease. Despite the clarity of the sky and the golden shafts of sunlight that pierced the hall's tall windows, Holmes had not slept, That much was evident from the shadow beneath his eyes and the restless energy that animated his every movement. He sat in a high-backed chair near the hearth. The ledgers and maps recovered from the hidden chambers spread before him in meticulous arrangement, his pipe smoldering steadily at his side. I approached quietly, reluctant to disturb his thoughts, but he looked up before I could speak, his eyes alight with that peculiar intensity that heralded some new revelation. "Watson," he said without preamble, "the net we have uncovered is wider than even I first suspected. These men do not smuggle silver alone. They traffic in information, in influence, in the corruption of officials. Look here." He thrust one of the ledgers into my hands, his long finger tracing a line of coded entries. At first glance, meaningless scrawl. But compare this with the ciphers used in certain intercepted communiques from the continent. It is identical, albeit more sophisticated. These pages are a mirror of clandestine trade routes, masked as mundane shipments. The implications are profound. I examined the entry he indicated, noting the strange amalgam of numbers and symbols. "Then what we stumbled upon is no mere smuggler's den," I said slowly. "Precisely," Holmes replied, rising to pace the room, his coat flaring with each turn. "This is a node of a greater enterprise, an enterprise directed, I believe, by a mind of rare cunning. Observe the structure, each cell compartmentalized, each operative instructed to know but fragments. Our prisoner of last night could reveal nothing of his master, because he knew nothing. Such design is not common criminality. It is organization of a military order." His words chilled me, for they spoke of an enemy far greater than any we had faced within the mist-shrouded moors. Before I could reply, Lady Cassandra entered, her pale face framed by the morning light. She had slept little as well, but a new determination had settled upon her. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "the villagers grow restless. They fear reprisals, whispers of accomplices still at large. Some speak of abandoning the valley altogether." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Their fear is not unfounded. This house, by its very design, invited terror, but fear is precisely what these men cultivated. For a terrified populace asks fewer questions and offers less resistance. To leave now would be to hand victory to the very forces we oppose. We must instead confront them openly, here and now." Lady Cassandra's gaze flickered toward the ledgers. "And you believe you can?" Holmes smiled faintly. "I never embark upon a pursuit unless I believe the quarry may be taken. But courage is needed for more than myself. Your people must see with their own eyes that the phantoms which plagued them were flesh and blood. Only then will the spell of superstition be broken." With that, he declared his intent to return once more to the house with no doors. Not to seek hidden chambers, but to dismantle its aura of dread in full view of the villagers. Lady Cassandra, though apprehensive, agreed. Messengers were sent, and by afternoon a crowd had gathered at the edge of the moor, their faces wary but curious. Holmes stood before them, tall and austere, his voice carrying with remarkable clarity. "Good people," he began, "for too long this house has stood as a monument to your fears. You whispered of curses, of shadows without form, but I tell you, within those walls I found no specters, only men. Men who preyed upon your fears, who cloaked their crimes in the guise of phantoms. They are now in chains. What remains is stone and dust, nothing more." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Holmes motioned for the villagers to follow, and together we ascended to the house. Lanterns and tools had been prepared, and under Holmes's direction, panels were pried open. False walls revealed, chambers laid bare. Each secret of the house was unveiled in daylight, each hidden device displayed. The villagers gasped at the sight of the ledgers and maps, the crates of contraband, the intricate design that had seemed supernatural in shadow, but was now revealed as cunning artifice. Holmes raised one of the masks worn by the captured intruders, holding it aloft. "This," he declared, "was your ghost. Nothing but cloth and paint. Fear has no power once it is unmasked." The effect was profound. Faces that had been drawn with dread began to lighten, and murmurs of awe replaced whispers of fear. The spell was broken. Yet Holmes's gaze, I noted, was not upon the crowd, but upon the horizon, as though he already sought the next link in the chain. That evening, after the villagers dispersed with newfound confidence, Holmes and I returned to the hall. The prisoner captured in the secret chamber had been secured under heavy guard, and Lestrade, who had been summoned by telegraph, was expected by morning to take him into custody. Holmes spread the ledgers once more upon the table, his lean fingers tapping at a name repeated across several pages. Here, Watson. This name recurs with too much frequency to be coincidence. Armitage & Co., ostensibly a firm of importers based in London. See how it appears alongside every major shipment, always obscured yet never absent. I suspect this is the London nexus of the entire organization. And you mean to pursue it there? I asked. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Most assuredly. The battle here was but a skirmish. The true war awaits in London, where influence and corruption may shield these men more effectively than stone walls. Yet with these ledgers in hand, we possess their map. The house with no doors is breached, and from its ruins we shall follow the trail to its master. He leaned back, his expression momentarily contemplative. But I confess, Watson, there is one matter yet unsettled. The masked intruder we seized last night bore upon him a letter. Cryptic, yes, but not impenetrable. It hinted at a meeting to be held soon in the city, with one referred to only as the benefactor. Until I have looked upon the face of that man, I shall not rest. I felt a chill, for the tone of his voice carried that relentless resolve I had heard only in the gravest of cases. It was the tone he used when the stakes were nothing less than life and death. Outside, the moor lay hushed beneath the stars, the house now silent, its secrets exposed. Yet within the quietude lingered an unspoken truth, that our victory was but the beginning of a struggle far greater, one that would draw us into the very heart of London's underworld and perhaps beyond. Holmes rose, gathering the ledgers into his case. His profile etched against the firelight seemed more gaunt, more driven than ever. "Sleep well tonight, Watson," he said quietly. "For tomorrow the hunt resumes. The house with no doors has fallen, but the man who built it remains at large, and I mean to find him." The night silence clung heavily upon the moor as we prepared to leave the valley behind. Holmes, ever methodical, had already dispatched the recovered ledgers and documents to Scotland Yard by secure courier, with instructions that Lestrade himself see to their safekeeping. Yet I could see that Holmes's mind was not at rest. He had fixed upon the name, the benefactor, and it was as though all the strength of his intellect had narrowed to a single point of pursuit. His gaze, sharp and restless, remained on the path ahead as the carriage bore us back toward London. During the long journey, Holmes spoke little, his fingers steepled, his eyes half closed in a state that resembled slumber, but was in truth a deep inward calculation. From time to time he muttered fragments of deduction, as though he could not contain the flow of thought. Compartmentalized cells, coded accounts, influence within London society. I did not interrupt him, for I knew that in such moments, his brain worked at a pitch far beyond the reach of ordinary conversation. We arrived in Baker Street in the small hours, the lamp still lit in Mrs. Hudson's sitting-room window. Holmes immediately set about his work, laying the ledgers across our table and comparing them with his own files, many of which had been accumulated over years of quiet observation. His remarkable system of cross-indexing now revealed its full worth, for within an hour he had matched several obscure names from the ledgers to known figures of shady repute in the docks, in certain clubs of ill omen, and in foreign circles that moved at the edge of diplomacy. But always the same thread recurred: Armitage & Co., and always, in Holmes's muttered deductions appeared that enigmatic title, the benefactor. At last he sat back, exhaustion briefly showing in the set of his shoulders. "Watson," he said, "we are on the brink of unmasking a design more dangerous than any smuggler's scheme. This benefactor is not merely a financier of crime. He is its architect. Observe how the ledgers conceal shipments under harmless terms: timber, coal, wool. But beneath each lies contraband or weapons or information passed into the wrong hands. And see, here in a cipher I have cracked, entries corresponding not only to cargo but to payments made to men of influence. Politicians, constables, customs officers. A web of corruption so fine that its master may pull strings without ever being seen." Before I could reply, a sharp knock sounded at the door. It was Lestrade, his coat still damp from the night air. He carried a telegram which he handed wordlessly to Holmes. My friend opened it swiftly, his eyes narrowing as he read. "It is as I expected," Holmes said at last. "A meeting of Armitage & Co. has been called this very evening, under the guise of a charitable banquet. The benefactor will attend in person." He rose at once, his energy renewed as though sleep were a thing forgotten. "This is the moment, Watson. The house with no doors was but the outer wall. Tonight, we strike at its master. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Holmes procured a pair of evening suits and, with his customary talent for disguise, altered his appearance with subtle touches. An added curl to the hair, a faint line of shadow to change the shape of his jaw. As for myself, he insisted I remain as I was. Your presence, Watson, as a man of medicine in good standing, will serve as cover. Few would suspect that you attend as witness to a snare. By dusk we arrived at the grand hall on the Strand, where the banquet was to be held. The street outside glittered with carriages, and gentlemen in fine dress ushered their ladies through the great doors. Holmes and I entered with them, our invitations procured through some sleight of hand I dared not ask after, passing without scrutiny. Within, the hall blazed with light and music. Crystal chandeliers cast their brilliance upon gilt mirrors, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of wine and perfume. Yet beneath the gaiety I sensed an undercurrent of something darker. Men gathered in groups, their conversations hushed, their glances sharp. This was no ordinary banquet. Holmes steered me quietly toward a corner, his gaze sweeping the room with that penetrating precision I had seen so often before. There, he murmured, indicating a figure at the far end. A tall man, immaculately dressed, with an expression of calm authority that commanded deference. Around him clustered several others, deferential in manner. That, Watson, is the benefactor. I studied the man with care. His face was unremarkable at first glance, yet the longer one looked, the more one sensed the force behind it. Eyes that missed nothing, a mouth curved in a perpetual smile that did not touch those eyes. His presence seemed to anchor the room. Holmes did not approach at once. Instead, he circled the hall slowly, pausing to exchange pleasantries with those he recognized from his files. In this way, he confirmed the breadth of the conspiracy. Bankers, importers, even a minor official from the Foreign Office. All were here, bound by invisible ties to the man they called benefactor. At last, when the banquet reached its height, Holmes stepped forward. With a calm I envied, he addressed the tall figure directly. "Mr. Armitage, I presume?" he said, his voice carrying clearly above the din. The benefactor turned, his expression unaltered. "You are mistaken, sir. I am but a patron of commerce." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Commerce? Call it by its true name, conspiracy. I have here the ledgers from your house with no doors, and in them enough evidence to bring half this assembly to trial." A hush fell upon the hall. Faces turned, whispers rippled. The benefactor's smile never faltered. "Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "I wondered how long it would take you to arrive. You have been most diligent. But you play a dangerous game, standing alone amid so many." "Not alone," Holmes replied, and with a signal, Inspector Lestrade and a squad of plainclothes officers stepped from the shadows, their presence hidden until that very moment. Gasps rose from the crowd and several men attempted to flee, only to be swiftly restrained. The benefactor's composure cracked, if only for an instant. His eyes narrowed and he drew himself to his full height. "You think you have won," he said, his voice low. "But men such as I are not so easily caged. There are others, more than you can count. Strike me down and another shall rise." Holmes regarded him steadily. "Perhaps. But for tonight, sir, it is you who must answer." At Holmes's nod, Lestrade stepped forward and placed the man under arrest. The hall erupted into chaos. Shouts, protests, the sound of footsteps retreating as the web unraveled. Through it all, Holmes stood motionless, his gaze fixed upon the man he had pursued from the moors to the heart of London. Later, in the quiet of Baker Street, Holmes allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He sat by the fire, his violin resting untouched beside him, and spoke softly as though to himself. The house with no doors was not merely a place, Watson. It was a symbol of secrecy, of corruption hidden behind walls of fear. Tonight we tore down those walls. Yet I do not deceive myself. The benefactor was right, others will rise. The struggle against such men is endless, but so long as there is breath in my body I shall oppose them. I looked at him then, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. He seemed at once weary and indomitable, a man driven by a purpose beyond the reach of comfort. And as the night deepened around us, I understood that for Holmes, the true victory was not in the arrest, nor the applause of the newspapers that would surely follow, but in the relentless pursuit of truth itself, wherever it might lead.